a couple of things in the news that are kind of pushing down that road of making sure that you've got better visibility into the exposures across your environment. There's a maturity model. It's a framework in there, and there's also a strategy guide that goes with that. Take a look at that. For those of you, if anybody who was out at the Gartner Symposium in Orlando recently, I did a session there about how exposure management is going to impact the vulnerability and remediation space in the coming years here. And if you came by our booth, you would have seen this matrix of capabilities in there. It's really starting from a baseline of where vulnerability management was previously and how we need to try to evolve around several key capabilities in that space. Two of the biggest ones being asset visibility and really getting a tighter tie into remediation. One of the reasons why many of you come to this event is getting the security context to help back up the why do we need to remediate things? Do we need to remediate certain things faster? How do we better prioritize and reduce risk? That's really about what that exposure management mind shift is all about. So a lot of what you will see from our solutions like our Neurons for Patch Management solution and our risk-based vulnerability management platform is bringing that risk context into play. We're going to talk about a 0-day today. That 0-day is not rated critical. It does not have a CVSS score of a 9x. So that's one of the challenges that traditional vulnerability management has is lack of security context, which means you're blind on some of how you prioritize and your remediation may not be treating the right things with urgency. So there's a few things in there that you can grab and take a look at if you would like. All right, getting into the updates for this month, we're going to do a quick overview of the Patch Tuesday release. We're going to talk about some recent news, and then we're going to switch over to Todd's going to walk us through the bulletin releases for Microsoft and the third-party vendors who all released yesterday. And then we're going to talk about what we refer to as between the Patch Tuesdays. There's a lot of activities that happen continuously throughout those weeks in between Patch Tuesday. So Todd's going to walk us through a number of the different updates that had security-related fixes in them. Google may have released an update yesterday that was only bug fix and stability fixes. But over the past three to 4 weeks, they've also resolved 27 CVEs in their weekly updates. So that's the type of thing that a lot of times you may miss some of that context if you're looking at things only once a month. We try to bring more of that in between visibility into our products and into this event. So, all right, let's see, going into yesterday's update, Adobe had several releases. There were, I believe, a total of 8. 4 of those are part of their Creative Cloud suite, which is specifically the product sets that we're supporting. So when we talk about Adobe, we're specifically talking about the Adobe products that our patching solutions directly are able to update. There are a few other updates that did release from Adobe as well, but those are not as widely used in organizations. They're usually a small footprint within most organizations. Microsoft had 5 products that were getting updates yesterday. 3 of those were critical, 2 important. And then Mozilla did have 3 updates yesterday. Google did release yesterday, but that's non-security related, so we don't have a specific call out for that here, just because there were no CVEs fixed. News-wise, this is where I'm going to be switching gears. I'm going to switch over to some browser links here in just a second. But as you're going through this, you can follow along and grab the links there if you've already grabbed the PowerPoint presentation. And we're going to go through and talk a little bit about some of the recent news and how, or the implications of many of those things on what your upcoming activities are and potentially your longer term activities. So the first article that we had on there was, we have our first end of life for the Windows 11 side. In this case, it's only for Windows 11 Home and Pro, and specifically let's see, where is it? It's my place. There we go. The 23H2. So 23H2, November 11th, 2025 was the end of life date for that. Enterprise and education, that end of life date is next year. So if you're on enterprise and EDU editions of 23H2, you've got another year. For Home and Pro, this is your last security update for that edition. So make sure you're getting those moved up to 24H2 or 25H2. The next article is going through talking a little bit about Exchange. So we've talked a little bit about all the end of lives that happened last month in last month's presentation. This month, there's some additional information that came out around several of the global cybersecurity agencies banded together and provided some additional guidance. And there is a little known but very important extension to the on-prem Exchange. If you are running on-prem Exchange, Microsoft did provide a 6-month ESU for Exchange on-prem. So you'd need to go and read up on the specifics of what it takes to get in there. They were very clear that they are not recommending people take this route. It is really for organizations who absolutely cannot get up to Exchange SE at this time. They're giving that 6-month extension to that if you subscribe to that ESU path. But they're still very guarded about that because there's a lot of security concerns with continuing to use the on-prem Exchange. This document goes through a number of recommendations and guidance from the cybersecurity agencies globally. There's CISA, the Australian Signals Directorate, the Canadian Cybersecurity Center, all worked together. NSA was in there as well. They are working together to try to provide you with guidance if you are going to be continuing to run this, especially for that 6-month ESU. This is the guidance that they're providing on how to better secure that Exchange environment in your environment. So that is one of the links that you can use here to get to those best practice guidance. But that is a couple of the things that came out around Exchange. Todd is going to talk a little bit about Office, because Office 2016 and 2019, I believe, both end-of-lifed last month as well. And Microsoft did patch some things there. So we're going to talk a little bit about that when we get to the updates for this month. But there was a lot of end-of-lives last month. And just a couple of things as you're going through everything, make sure that you continue to monitor and clean up any instances of any end-of-life software in your environment. As we've seen already this month, our first Windows 10, ESU update is this month, and we already have a 0-day. So the risks of continuing to run Windows 10 without ESU coverage, it's no longer hypothetical. It's a real world risk. There's already one actively exploited vulnerability that's exposed on that platform. So if you are going to continue running that, make sure you get ESU coverage in place and that you keep up to date with those. Take additional mitigation steps wherever possible, but that's very important so that you're not leaving systems exposed to vulnerabilities that are actively being targeted. The next article that I linked to was this one here about Zoom. There's been a lot of vulnerabilities on Zoom recently that were making the news in one way or another. There's one that was first resolved back in, I believe it was April. And then, here it is. This CVE was initially published on April 8th and then revised again on November 10th. So there's a couple of things that were re-updated in the most recent Zoom updates in the past month or so here. The more important part of what I'm including this link on this month is there are certain applications that you need to be focused on updating more frequently than your monthly maintenance. So for those of you who are using the Neurons for Patch Management experience, you've seen that we've created specific tasks for your routine maintenance, or that maintenance you come around to once a month, where you do your OS updates, third-party updates, pretty much everything. And then we've got that priority updates bucket. This is kind of backing evidence to say, here's another type of application group you should be trying to do more frequently. Zoom doesn't release on Patch Tuesday, typically. They're going to release as they need to. So it's a continuous release product. It's also a collaboration platform. So it's more highly targeted by threat actors. So having that and browsers, applications like that, especially those on a more continuous release basis, be part of a priority updates or weekly or even daily product check to say, are these specific applications that put our users at higher risk updated more frequently? that's the reason why I'm including that in here this month. Speaking back to that exposure management mindset, this is the types of things that we need to be more cognizant of. It's not about doing your monthly maintenance and making sure that by the end of your monthly maintenance that things are compliant. We need to get into that mindset of getting into continuous compliance. What applications are introducing risk to our business more frequently and need to be updated more aggressively? And it doesn't matter verticals. It doesn't matter, what challenges you have there. I've been talking to a number of different companies in the financial space, in the healthcare space, in a variety of different verticals, and many of them are looking to adjust their mindset to aggressively patching certain applications more frequently. So that's just a good example of certain groups of applications you want to consider for that more frequent priority updates bucket. The next article is around a UK cybersecurity bill that's putting tougher rules for critical infrastructure in place. So this is a good read on, again, kind of that progression towards why are we looking at this exposure management evolution as a necessary step. Threat actors are getting more aggressive. Zero-day exploits are increasing. The introduction of AI into the threat actors' arsenal is making it so that they can get more sophisticated with their phishing attempts. They can get more sophisticated and be able to find exploitable vulnerabilities faster and being able to orchestrate attacks more effectively. If a threat actor can implement an agentic AI model to make it so that they can go and attack an organization more effectively and faster, they will absolutely take advantage of that. And we've seen AI coming into the threat actor ecosystem already. This type of cybersecurity bill is looking at how to address getting organizations to keep up with and move faster around the legislation side. They talk a little bit about the fact that when a cybersecurity incident happens, you don't have time to wait for legislation to catch up and define what needs to be done. So they're trying to put in penalties, yes, but more importantly, they're trying to put in capabilities in place for legislation to be able to dictate a faster response to address cybersecurity shifts in threat actor behaviors, in the types of attacks that are happening, and making sure that organizations are staying up to date with their cybersecurity practices and able to defend against modern cyber threats. So it's a good read. It's also expanding into the vendor side. So MSPs, data centers, they also fall under this umbrella of scrutiny of being able to, one, they have to be able to notify within 24 hours if an event occurs, and they also have to be able to adapt to and adjust to the additional requirements that come out of cybersecurity incidents as they happen. So these emergency powers are what they're trying to implement in the UK to try to get more aggressive on cybersecurity responses. So that's an interesting article to read and kind of a tip of the iceberg, the direction that things are moving, where evolutions in the vulnerability management and remediation space are shifting towards what is being referred to as exposure management. Next article, Cisco had a new attack variant targeting firewalls that they've been educating their user base on. Cisco became aware of this new variant on November 5th, and they've been pushing organizations to plug that vulnerability as quickly as possible. So there are details in there if you're using Cisco's firewall. From what they're seeing right now, there's still nearly 50,000 Cisco devices that are vulnerable to these particular vulnerabilities. The two flaws, as of September 30th, those numbers were around just shy of 50,000 devices. So they're, again, still urging people to get those addressed within their environment. One of the reasons I'm including this here is, more importantly, any network edge devices. This is one of those areas where organizations need to figure out how do we get updates to these types of edge devices happening more quickly. There's a lot of cases where these types of vulnerabilities are plugged by the vendors, but organizations struggle to update these types of devices. It's not for invalid reasons. When you're talking about firewalls, routers, VPNs, they've all got very complex configurations. And if you break some of those configurations after you push an update, you make it very difficult to do business. These are the types of network infrastructure pieces that can take down your entire company or large segments of your organization very quickly if there's a breaking change in one of those configs that changes as you update. So yes, there's a lot of concern around how quickly can you move with that. But one of the, I think it was 2, maybe 3 months ago, I had linked to some vulnerability research from a threat intel vendor where they were saying the 0 days that have been monitored so far this year, in the first half of this year, the top target of those 0 days were network edge devices. So those network edge devices are definitely being targeted in a significant way, and threat actors are continuing to focus their attention on those. So it's just another, again, reinforcement of the areas that we need to look at within our organizations to make sure that we're staying on top of the top targeted areas and try to go faster in certain areas where we need to. So that's a lot of the news that I was seeing recently. The one Microsoft 0 day that we have this month is this one with the Windows kernel elevation of privilege vulnerability. That's CVE 2025 622215. Severity is important. Microsoft gave this a CVSS score of a 7.0. For those of you who have been longtime followers of this, you know that in the past several years, we've seen an average of 20 or more Microsoft 0 days each year. And in that mix, most of them, the vast majority, so if they released 20 a year, statistically, 18 of those are going to be important with a CVSS score somewhere in the 6.5 to 7.8 range. One each year typically goes up into that critical range with a CVSS score somewhere in the 9.2 to 9.8 range. And one will typically be down in the medium category with a CVSS score of a 4.5 to a 6.5. But the majority of them are going to look a lot more like this. So if your organization is still prioritizing based on vendor severity and CVSS score, the biggest challenge with this, and one of the things that risk-based vulnerability management tried to solve, and exposure management is trying to solve in a more effective, kind of more integrated way, is bringing better risk-based prioritization into the average organization's process. I was just talking with an analyst this week, and still more than 50% of organizations have very basic prioritization metrics that they're using today. What this means is, one, you're prioritizing and looking at the wrong set of vulnerabilities. They're the ones that look like they're bad, but they're not the ones actively being targeted by threat actors. The majority of exploited vulnerabilities are actually lower in severity and CVSS score, but actively being targeted. And the reason they can do that is they're oftentimes chaining multiple of these vulnerabilities together. CVSS and vendor severity are looking at a CVE by itself. Threat actors are taking 2, 3, 4 vulnerabilities at a time, chaining those together to achieve their outcome, and going around our visibility because they're flying under the radar of what you're prioritizing. So again, exposure management mindset, shifting towards a risk-based approach, getting a better prioritization of that. You're not trying to solve all findings in your environment. What you need to solve first is those findings that are actively being targeted by threat actors. Those that are tied to ransomware or actively being exploited are ones that you want to focus on first. That type of experience is available, just a matter of most organizations still don't have it in a way where it integrates it directly into how they're operating today. And that's one of the challenges that exposure management is trying to help bring together, is to make it so that it really comes into a platform where you can get asset visibility, vulnerability aggregation, prioritization, and remediation all from a single platform. Now, it's not a single vendor ecosystem. There's going to be integrations with a variety of players in there, but this tries to bring it together to give you more of a end-to-end experience that helps you to get that better visibility. This vulnerability, by the way, does affect all of the current supported Windows OS editions, and it also includes Windows 10. So when I have mentioned before that A lot of times when we get around to these end of lives for a Windows OS, some organizations, are like, yeah, I don't know, do we really need to spend the money for the ESU coverage? It's only going to be 6 months. Well, that's going based off of this is a hypothetical risk. Sorry to say, but month one after the ESU, we've already got a real world risk to the Windows 10 platform. There is a vulnerability that is actively exploitable. So any Windows 10 systems in your environment, the risk is not hypothetical. It is a real world risk. So try to make sure you've got good mitigations in place if you've got a very short term before you're going to be getting rid of it. If it's going to be any longer than a few months, you really need to look into that ESU coverage, because I expect we're going to see, several more 0 days that will be affecting the Windows 10 OS in the next few months here. So on the Ivanti side, we only had one update this month from the Ivanti product lines. This is for Ivanti Endpoint Manager. And there are 3 total CVEs that were being resolved, 1 new CVE and 2 that were resolved that were previously disclosed in October. So that is the lineup of 3 that are included in there. Just a quick note for any organizations that are still running on 2022, that did reach end of life at the end of October last month. So there's not going to be a patch release for 2022 as well. The 2024 SU4 release is the version that you want to get to, and that will keep you on the track for keeping up with vulnerabilities and updates for EPM. So that is the update from the Ivanti side. On the Linux side, there are 3 CVEs that we're going to talk about today. So again, for those of you who may be new to the event or maybe haven't joined in a little while, we've got a partnership with a vendor called TuxCare. TuxCare specializes in patching in the Linux world. And one of the things that they do distinctly different is they do what's called live patching, where they can patch the Linux kernel and several other of the critical applications without having to reboot the system. Their approach to that allows them to update the packages actively being used and ensuring that those packages are up to the secured level. So a good solution to complement what our solution does. Our approach to patching is a contentless one where we can see any packages that are on your repository and help you to manage the update of those for your Linux systems. TuxCare can make it so that in your data center environments, especially for those critical workloads, you can focus on specific Linux packages like the kernel and update those without as much downtime on a regular basis. So that live patching approach is something that they've been doing for years. They also have extended support for certain Linux distros that are still commonly being used. So if you're still running some of the older Ubuntu editions that are end of life now, they have an ESU option available directly from them that can help you to keep securing those devices for that extended life as well. What they also do is they feed some of the top vulnerabilities that you want to keep an eye on in the Linux world over to Todd and I to share with you all. 2 out of 3 of these this month are just ones to keep an eye on. One of them is actually hitting the news already. So we're going to talk a little bit about those. I'll start with the one in the news, and then we'll jump over back into slides to finish up our updates for the news section. This one is CVE 2025-41244. It is a privilege escalation vulnerability, and in this case, it is actually actively being targeted in VMware tools and ARIA operations. So this update applies specifically to those 2 VMware products. So if you are running those within your environment, this is definitely a vulnerability you'll want to be concerned about, actively being exploited by a nation state level threat actor who's trying to take advantage of this since mid-October. So mid-October 2024 looks like they started utilizing this one. Excuse me. So that is the one to be more urgently aware of this month. So this first one in the lineup there is CVE 2025-11561. Impacts Red Hat Linux and other major distros, but Red Hat Linux was the one that's kind of the main topic of discussion there. In default configurations, Kerberos local authentication plugin is enabled, but a fallback to this AN2LN plugin is possible. And that's where the attacker with permissions to modify certain AD attributes could impersonate a privileged user. So the mitigation in this case is to ensure that the SSSD Kerberos local authentication plugin is configured and the AN2LN plugin is disabled by adding the disable and 2LN into your KRB5 include file. So that's your mitigation option there, or look to your distribution of Linux that you're running and make sure that you get up to a level that resolves that vulnerability. One note on the Linux side, things move a little bit differently than the Windows and Mac side and a lot of the other third-party vendors. Linux being open source ecosystem, each of the vendors approach this at their pace. So that means that you may have a vendor like Red Hat respond to it much sooner than some of the other platforms that are affected, but just haven't gotten around to it yet because they rely on either their open source community or a limited amount of resources to tackle updates specifically. So sometimes these can take months before they start to really get resolved within the broader Linux ecosystem. Hence why this has been being targeted since last year, October, and it's becoming a topic again now. The second one on our list today is the one that we just talked about that is specific to the VMware tools and ARIA operations. So that's the 41244. That one is actively being exploited. So upgrading your Linux distro to a supported version that has resolved this vulnerability is the recommendation there. The third one, CVE 2025-58438, impacts both Windows and Linux platforms. It's a directory traversal vulnerability in Python libraries. So if you are using Python on Windows or Linux, this is a vulnerability that you may want to take a look for and make sure that you've got it resolved. CVSS score is a 9.4. The vulnerability getting patched was patched in version 5.5.1 of the Internet Archive library that was affected. So upgrading to that version of the Python library will resolve the issue. There were some servicing stack updates this month for Server 2008 and Server 2012. So make sure that you're keeping up to date with those servicing stack updates. A lot of times there will be changes that happen in there that will come into play down the road a few months later, typically, but they can be more quickly than that. But that servicing stack update oftentimes are changes that they need to put in place to be able to fix other stuff in the future. So you do want to make sure to keep up with those. There were some additional development tools that also got updated this month. Oftentimes things that require either your development teams to do a change or your operations teams to make a config change or trigger an update within certain platform features. So the Azure Monitor and Microsoft Visual Studio changes that were pushed out this month were some of those that your extended teams may have to take action on. We already talked a little bit about the end of life. So this month is the first month of Windows 10 extended support. 23H2 for Windows 11 Home and Pro has reached end of life. And you see the two dates highlighted in green there. That's the 25H2 had a end of support date added. So this is just calling out the fact that those dates have now been added in 2027 and 2028. So it's a ways out, just letting you know that those were officially made available there. We've already talked a bit about Windows 10 support, but Microsoft tends to focus on selling this in 1-year increments. So even if you're only going to use it for 3 months, Microsoft would, be charging you for that year of coverage. If you're one of the organizations who's talked to us about getting that extended support within our products, two things. One, you do still have to pay Microsoft for the licensing to be able to push those. And we also do that 1-year increment because it keeps things clean. So if you wanted to go from now until, 18 months from now, you technically would still have to buy the first 2 years of ESU support from Microsoft and subscribe to those first 2 years through us. The reason for that is to keep things consistent between Microsoft and Ivanti and yourselves to make sure that there's no discrepancies or confusion around what's being committed to. And LTSC, so those of you running any of the long-term servicing channels, this is just keeping track of those end of support dates. So a ways out for any of those. Looks like 2027 is the first one we have to worry about there. That'll be for 2016. On that note, Todd, I think it's over to you for the updates.
Okay, Chris, thanks. I'll take over from here. Chris, one note in the questions, a couple of people are asking for your URL to the VMware vulnerability you pointed out earlier in Linux side. If you could cut that in there.
Will do.
Okay,
Yep.
let's get on to the releases we saw yesterday. So we did have updates from Mozilla across several of their products. We saw an update for Firefox 145. They addressed 16 vulnerabilities. I was rated high. Be aware of that one on the browser side. I know a lot of people use Firefox and definitely want to keep up with that one. We saw an update for one of their long-term support versions, 140.5. Some overlap with the 16 vulnerabilities that were addressed in the 145 release. There are 9 of those here. So those were covering everything from remote code execution through information disclosure. So several vulnerabilities there you want to be aware of. And we also saw a release for a much older version, ESR version 115.30 came out as well, and 4 vulnerabilities addressed there in that older version. So if you're running any one of those 3 versions of the browser, you want to make sure that you update. As Chris said, it's important to keep up with those. We do include some of the Creative Cloud updates that we support here. So I'll go through 4 of these very quickly. There was an update for InDesign. It was rated critical, addressed 4 vulnerabilities there. Just like with the Mozilla vulnerabilities earlier on the Adobe side as well, none of these are known exploited. So there are no 0 days as far as that goes. But you obviously want to keep up to date with updating your application. So we have an update for InDesign addressing 4 distinct vulnerabilities. Those of you that use Adobe InCopy, 3 vulnerabilities here, addressing the latest 2 versions that they support. We did see an update for Photoshop, just a single vulnerability. Again, all these are rated critical. And interestingly enough, all these vulnerabilities in Creative Cloud this month were all RCE or arbitrary code execution, as the way they call it on the Adobe side. So definitely something you want to address. And finally, we do see an update for Illustrator, addressing 2 vulnerabilities there as well. Again, all these applications will require a restart after you patch them. On the Windows 11 side, after the huge number of vulnerabilities addressed last month, we did see quite a drop, just 38 this month. Chris did talk about CVE 2025-62215, which is known to be exploited. It's also the one that carries over into the Windows 10 world, as he was speaking about there as well. I see that I did not include the links to the 2 KB articles. I didn't highlight those, even though they are listed here. So we'll have to get that updated for you. But there were updates across the board for 23H2, with that last version, as Chris said, of Windows Professional, Windows 11 Professional, as well as the updates all the way through Server 2025 as well. So continuing to get those. There was one known issue. You might remember throughout the month, there was an out-of-band patch around WSUS. There's apparently still some issues around that. It's not properly displaying the error reporting. So be aware of that one. The functionality has been temporarily removed to address this particular vulnerability. You can read a little bit more about this in the KB articles if you want to take a look, but that's the only known reported issue on these Windows 11 updates this month. As far as Office goes, we did see a couple of updates here. Again, the number of on-premise versions are definitely dropping. We're seeing under this particular bulletin, and we lump these together arbitrarily under this bulletin, by the way. There is an Office long-term servers channel for Mac 2021 and 2024. Office Online Server is going to be supported through the end of 2026. So you'll continue to get updates there for the various Office components. And I also lump Office for Android under this right now. You can take a look at this KB on Office Online Server. I did reference it in here, taking a look at these 9 vulnerabilities that were covered. Again, there's only one critical vulnerability of these 9. So it does drive this update to a critical level. I also made a note down here at the bottom. Chris was talking about this earlier. I was reading, it was kind of interesting in the KB articles that Microsoft is still going to periodically release some updates for these older and now end-of-life versions, even though only 1 month out. So we did see some updates for Office 2016 this month. And by the way, anybody who's on the Ivanti patch feeds, we did include those updates in the release yesterday. So you'll see those as well. As far as the online version go, we lumped these together under the Microsoft 365 apps. That includes not only 365 apps, but long-term servers channel 2021 and Office long-term servers channel 2024 as well. 11 vulnerabilities addressed yesterday in these. These are all primarily the click-to-run versions. And again, Microsoft says they may periodically release updates for end-of-life versions. And we did see some updates for 2019 as well, released yesterday. So be aware of that. If you're still running an older version, there is still an update available beyond the October release. We did see an update for SharePoint Server, only addressed a single vulnerability. Did have the 3 different KB articles across the different versions that are supported, including a subscription server, Enterprise 2016, and SharePoint Server 2019. Now, there is a known issue in here, and I wrote about it here in the known issues section. If you go into any of these KB articles, it talks about what you can do there. There is some PowerShell commands you can run to fix this in a more automated fashion. They do give a workaround. So definitely click into the article there. It has to do with basically setting up the domains to work properly with the farms that are set up out there. So be aware of that one as a known issue on SharePoint Server. We did see an update for SQL Server. They did release updates for both the GDR as well as the latest cumulative update versions. The only one that has actually changed number-wise is around Server 2022. We did see an update from CU20 to CU21. They did address one vulnerability. Again, it's not a publicly disclosed or known exploited vulnerability, but just be aware if you're running SQL Server, you might want to take this into account this month and run an update there. Between the Patch Tuesdays, as Chris mentioned, there is a continuous release process for many, many vendors. And what we do is we go through our catalog every month, and I gather together the information about what released since last Patch Tuesday. And I show here the updates in 3 different ways. We have security updates with CVEs, security updates without CVEs, where the vendor will tell you, hey, this is a security update, but they don't specifically quote the CVEs they're addressing. And we have things that we lump into the non-security category as well. The number in parentheses represents the number of updates that came out throughout the month, and we'll cover some of these here with CVEs in just a minute. Particularly on Chrome, as you know, we're getting that weekly update these days. Yesterday, as Chris said, we got a Chrome update with no CVE, but throughout the month here, we got an update way back on October 21st to address one vulnerability. We had one right before Halloween here on 10/28 that addressed 20 vulnerabilities, so definitely one you want to take into account. Again, these are all cumulative, so the latest update does include all these CVEs. So if you are patching to the latest version, you are keeping up with this. And finally, we saw an update back on the 5th of this month that addressed 5 vulnerabilities. A couple of other updates throughout the month. We saw a Docker update that addressed 1 vulnerability. A couple of other updates, Firefox, PDF Enterprise Reader. We saw a Jabra Direct, if you're using that particular product in your boardrooms. And we did see, of course, updates from Oracle last month. They have their quarterly CPU, a critical product update, as they call it, every quarter. The last quarter, there were many, many products updated, but in particular here, we focus in on the Java updates. So there are versions for Amazon Corretto that were updated. These are the long-term service versions, if you want to think of it that way. So 8, 11, 17, 21, and now there's a 25 version that is also being released. So these are the versions that are in long-term support. You can see the vulnerabilities here for various releases and the numbers that are used for Corretto. The numbers vary slightly. This is the actual Oracle Java Development Kit update itself. Keep in mind there's the Java runtime as well as the development side. In general, Oracle has changed up the way development is done. So you won't see the JREs for the more modern versions of Java, 11, 17, 21, and 25. Generally, what they want you to do is compile and build in the Java updates to your products. You won't see it on-the-fly runtime environment. These are the updates, though, for the various versions that were released last month. We did see there is a Red Hat OpenJDK as well that runs on the Microsoft systems. Again, similar CVEs and releases you'll see there. Other versions of Windows applications this month, we had an Opera update that fixed 1 vulnerability, VirtualBox, and a Snagit update as well. On the Apple side, since we do patch Apple applications as well as Mac OS with our products, we're running through kind of the same list here. There was a major release across all of the operating systems. I think it was back on November 3rd. You can see here that Sonoma, Sequoia, and Tahoe all got updates. Again, the Apple model is to support Mac OS generally back 3 versions, covering the last 3 years. You can see Tahoe, which is the newest operating system, what was just released last month. There's 105 vulnerabilities addressed, so you definitely want to make sure you keep up to date with that. They do also release a separate version of Safari running on top of Mac OS Sonoma and Sequoia, 21 vulnerabilities there. So when you're running these updates, you want to make sure that you cover the Safari update on those older operating systems as well. Again, quite a few vulnerabilities addressed by Apple this past month. Third-party side, we do see the same Chrome updates, a very similar breakdown in vulnerabilities for Chrome running on top of Mac OS. Like on the Windows side, we also saw an update for Docker addressing that same vulnerability. Firefox, we talked about that one earlier for Windows. There was also a corresponding one for Apple and Mac OS. And finally, an Opera update as well. We did see updates for Microsoft Edge as usual. They do pretty much a weekly update as well. Similar vulnerabilities on the Chromium side here, once again coming from Chromium in the Edge product. We do see a total of one update from way back when on the 17th. We saw 21 additional updates here the day after Halloween. And of course, we saw 3 just recently on the latest Edge update.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.